So your audience is getting that behind the scenes.
Well, I can cut that out.
Or you can have it as like, wow, she's paying attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, she really is. Okay.
Welcome to the Mediation Minute. We have a returning guest. Thank you, Ryan Chenevert, for joining us again today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
And Ryan, I want to give you full credit. This was your idea as to the topic, and I love the topic. Ryan wants to share with us, and I do too, want to share with everyone several books that are highly recommended for mediation and for negotiation.
Books are a new way, or a better way, I think, to kind of seek mentorship. And I've used that early on because I'm not, that experience in my career, but I've used books to help me kind of progress professionally a lot faster than, some of my other colleagues would.
I think it's a great way to phrase it, that a book is a mentor. And you will learn things that you're not going to learn when you're in the same environment.
And just to let the listeners know, the first book we're going to talk about is Sell or Be Sold by Grant Cardone. He has absolutely nothing to do with the practice of law, absolutely nothing to do with mediation. He is a true born salesman, and he's actually a Lake Charles native. However, he's bounced around from California. I think now he lives in Miami, and he started as a car salesman. The second book I think we're going to talk about is a new one that I'm really excited about, and I think I've piqued your interest in it. It's called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And then the last one I think is
Getting to Yes.
That's it.
Which was put together by 2 members of the Harvard negotiation program. But our first book is Sold to Be Sold. One thing that popped up right away that I truly believe hit the nail on the head is that always we are selling, whether we're selling ourselves or selling an idea. You can believe passionately in your idea. You have to sell it to other people, and Chris Voss addresses that.
Right. So you're absolutely right. You are selling to either your client. Sometimes you're selling to yourself. You have to fully, and that's what Grant Cardone says. You have to fully believe in your product or your service. And as an attorney, you're fully believing in your client. And as a mediator, you are fully believing in that process, right? Because it is a process. And one of the things that we were talking about, mirroring, what can you do whenever you're a mediator? What can you do to get the other party or the other parties to give you the information that you need to help lead them in the right direction? And that's, essentially the biggest goal of the book, is to lead them in the direction that's going to get a resolution. And what Grant Cardone really focuses in on is, don't necessarily focus on the best deal, focus on the best outcome. And I think mediators can take that to heart.
Absolutely. And that is the way to bring people together. Once they feel they're heard and they're working towards a goal rather than necessarily a number, they can work together to get there. What else did you take from Grant's book?
As a mediator, it's very important to understand kind of the market conditions. Grant Cardone talks about it more in either real estate or car salesmanship. What's the market like? What's the economy look like? But as a mediator, what you can translate that into, what are new verdicts coming out in different jurisdictions? How would that affect a specific outcome? If we're in the 19th, is it more liberal or conservative? We're in Orleans Parish. What's the climate of that jurisdiction, and how would it affect this case? Is it a judge trial, a bench trial, or is it a jury trial? All of those things can be discussed.
And that's a great transfer of the market concept to looking at, as attorneys do, Eason's Guide to see what verdicts are out there and find out what the judges are doing. Switching now to Never Split the Difference.
Never Split the Difference is by Chris Voss. And this guy has one of the coolest backgrounds I've ever read about. He is a former FBI hostage negotiator. And he didn't start that way. He started in regular law enforcement and went into the FBI. And this was at a time that the FBI didn't have a negotiating, any formalized rules or any practices or procedures. He was basically the one to start it. And they had a very terrible situation occur, a bad hostage situation where lives were lost. We're talking about lives, not money. right? You know,
And
there
some
might
of us split that difference.
exactly. So you can't just say let's compromise on this thing. Focused on the emotional aspect of negotiating. It's asking, you know, how and what questions, and it's listening, active listening, and it's mirroring the responses, and it's getting the other party to basically tell you what you can do to get a resolution. And it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating, mind blowing, and it's, I mean, if you don't read this, you are doing yourself a disservice, because it is going to increase your arsenal dramatically in any type of negotiation or mediation, whether it's buying a car, whether it's buying a house, anything.
One of the things that really struck me is advice about getting an answer from the other party. Think intuitively. A lot of mediators do this, but not always. And I think the rationale is perfect, and as described by Voss in this book, and that is, we try to get people to say yes when we should be trying to get them to say no, because saying no is powerful. That is something I had never thought of, the rationale behind that. So it was very empowering to read the rationale. It made perfect sense.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And you should always start with a no. Negotiation doesn't start until you get a no. And one of his examples is, you know, if you're just spinning your wheels and you're talking with somebody, as a mediator, you could say, well, have you given up on this? And you would expect the response to be no. And then you can go into, you know, mirror their response on, well, it seems like maybe this is really important to you. And then you want to get to them to start saying, that's right. And then you kind of follow up those that's right to getting to a yes.
As Voss uses one of my favorite analogies in his book, it's also in Getting to Yes, and I use it at the negotiations class that I teach at LSU. The orange example. You have an orange, and you have two teams of people who want that orange. And unless they actively listen and mirror, they may do something like split the orange. But they're both going to lose out, because it turns out one team is instructed you want the pulp, and the other you want the rind. And if they don't listen to each other, they don't walk away with quite as much.
That's exactly right. And another one that he says, you know, why you should never compromise is he's thinking about, you know, what happens if the husband wants to wear black shoes and the wife is telling the husband, you have to wear brown shoes. And then the husband says, okay, well, let's compromise. I'll wear one black shoe and one brown shoe. Well, that's not a compromise for anybody. It's kind of like the orange thing that you were talking about. It doesn't work. You have to listen to the other party and see which one's going to fit. Well, you're wearing a brown belt today. Shouldn't that match your shoes? That's right.
Now that you mention it, that's right. Yeah. So I loved the way he talked through these things. Some of the other points he made that may have stuck with your mind, I've shared the ones that really stayed with me.
Right. So it's all about mirroring, and it's all about trying to get the other person or you empathizing with the other person, getting them to feel comfortable with you, for them to start talking and start giving you the information. And that's done with asking open-ended questions, like a direct exam. Ask a lot of how and what questions. He says some other powerful questions is asking a what-how question, or a what-when question. So what happens when we get here? So what would happen whenever you come down to $200,000? Or what would happen if you came up to $100,000? Or what would need to happen in a mediation situation? And hopefully that would spur the party that you're speaking with to give you some information. Well, I would need them to come down to a certain amount. So then you can, you know, kind of start figuring out where the mediation is going to be headed. But he gives a lot of great talks, or a lot of great examples of actual situations that he has been involved in, a lot of situations that his students have been involved in. And I mean, he lists the questions, and I mean, it's like a transcript. It's phenomenal. And what he says is, if nothing else, go watch old episodes of Oprah. He said she is the queen of this, of open-ended questions and mirroring responses and getting people to communicate. She's the queen.
And having them feel comfortable that this is someone I can open up to.
Absolutely.
I know he used one example that even if the answer is what you hope for, you're still continuing that dialogue. And he said one, for example, you know, when the hostage takers, we want X amount of money, we want a helicopter to bring it. And as negotiator, he said, well, how? And what are you going to do once you get that? He said, sometimes the answer is that's for you to figure out. But he said, but that's okay, because I just learned they don't have a preference. They don't have something in their mind that I possibly could do to resolve this, but somehow they didn't communicate it to me.
Right, and another example of kind of following those lines is he said he learned a lot of this from a drug dealer, kind of a CI that they were using. He said, you know, in the FBI, we were trained to say, well, I need to speak with the hostage. And he said that this CI, whenever he was talking with the person that was holding the hostage, he said, how do I know she's okay? And he said that simple question, reframing it and asking a how question, got the drug dealer to say, here, you can talk to her. And so they were able to find out that she was okay, and the communication kept going, and she was ended up being free.
Instead of closing off with a no answer.
That's exactly right.
Look, you're going to find a way to empathize with that person. You're going to have something common with them. But if you're pretending and you're picking on something else just to pretend you have empathy, people pick up on that. And it's patronizing to them and it's insulting to them. And looking at someone's emotions and their needs, we're going to move on to getting to yes. One of my favorite examples in that, I've already shared the orange example. I love that example because it opens up more possibilities. Another example that was wonderful that was in that book went to listening, and this was talking about negotiations between Egypt and Israel, that they kept redrawing the line between the countries. They couldn't agree, kind of splitting the difference. Couldn't agree. Everyone stepped back, got involved in active listening. Turns out Egypt wanted sovereignty because that had been their land for centuries and centuries. Israel really didn't care about the sovereignty of that strip. They just didn't want to have Egypt's tanks right on their border. So that's how they got that neutral strip between the countries, which splitting the difference didn't work.
Right, right. I mean, that's just fascinating. And I remember this book mainly because Professor Paul Barreau, who taught me civil mediation at LSU, would give us this book after our first successful mediation. But, you know, kind of complimenting what you did right, what you did maybe not so well, or what you could work on. But the principles in it, again, translate towards, you know, all these books and really help you to remember you got to separate the people from the problem. And I think that's what one of your examples were. And you want to focus on the interest rather than their positions. And I think another principle that it really harped on was that you want to make sure that you're confirming that the agreement is based on objective criteria. And I think it all boils down to just kind of fairness, really.
I think that's a good summary. I think the simplest example for deciding something on an objective basis, you're going to sell or buy a car, you look at the Blue Book value. Yeah. And people feel that's fair. As you mentioned, it's about fairness. They feel that's fair, and they negotiate, and no one walks away feeling that they've been taken advantage of. Which is another wonderful thing about negotiation and mediation, is that you can have a win-win.
That's absolutely right. And I think each one of these books that we've talked, Sell or Be Sold, Never Split the Difference, Getting to Yes, all talk about providing external evidence or external documents. So even in Sell and Be Sold, like you talked about, bring in, you know, here's the Carfax or here's the Kelley Blue Book, showing something tangible to somebody else that you're trying to sell to or you're trying to position your point to, just like you would in a trial. You know, that's how you're going to convince them. You know, showing them the tangible evidence. And then obviously in Getting to Yes, it's a big point in it as well.
Thank you for introducing us to 3 new mentors by way of these books, Ryan. It has been a pleasure to have you on the Mediation Minute. Give your contact information again. I know someone can scroll back and look at your earlier podcast, but for convenience.
Absolutely. Ryan James Chenevert, Fletcher, Roy, and Chenevert. We're downtown Baton Rouge. We got the beautiful mural on the back of our building with Pete Maravich, Louis Armstrong, Huey P. Long. You can reach us at 888-8000. My email address is rchenevert, rchenevert @fletcherandroy.com. And I even started a little blog, and that's www.ryanchenevert.wordpress.com.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ryan.
Thank you.